Hi guys, thank you for tuning in to G&G Live Show, Gail and Gurpreet's show. This show actually is all about HR, employee experience related topics. So today we have a very interesting topic that it's kind of a continuation from our last week's discussion about managers and leaders, and we had our lovely guest Jenny on. That we thought that was important to continue this conversation, but a little bit on a different level. To say the least, is something that both of us, Gail and I, have discussed, and we think it's important to talk about these things. And I think we've kind of like missed out the mark on talking about leaders and managers during this pandemic. They're also a very important element in organizations, and a lot of us are not talking about them. And how much pressure these leaders, managers have right now during this pandemic. And hence our topic today, well, how much support are they getting right now? Like it's going to be almost a year that we've been in this pandemic. So what support are they getting, and how much pressure are these managers and leaders in? So we're going to dive right in because we only have 30 minutes. And as always, I always like Gil to start first. So Gil, what's your thought and take on our topic today?
This is such an important topic, and this comes as an offshoot from our conversation last week with Jenny, which was really a valuable and really important conversation. But this is about the fact that leaders are going through this too. They are going through the pandemic too, and leaders are having an employee experience too. And that's something that often gets forgotten, as people like to point fingers at leaders, people like to put blame on leaders. And the reality is that leaders are under more pressure probably than at any other time, because we have this global uncertainty, this global pandemic. As well, at any given time, we're all under the watchful eye of social media.
Yeah.
So any slight miscue, slight miss up, or major mess up, it has a greater chance of impacting the employer brand, could go viral, et cetera, et cetera. These are all issues that leaders, 10, 15, 20 years ago were never facing. And certainly they weren't facing the lack of a playbook that exists for facing a pandemic. Because that's one of the things that we all also need to understand is that, especially March, April, May, there were a lot of mistakes made by leaders because they had no idea what they were doing, because nobody
been in a pandemic before,
and nobody knew how long it was going to last. Nobody knew about the economic impact, the emotional impact, the physical impact. All of these things were still uncertain at the time. So a lot of leaders, faced with complete ambiguity about the future of their business, were being asked to make decisions without any understanding of what life was going to be like a month, 2 months, 6 months down the road. And this created a lot of chaos for a lot of individuals. But the importance of the experience that the leaders were having is that their chaos then gets passed down to their teams.
Yeah.
The chaos they were feeling gets passed down to their teams, and the greater uncertainty gets passed down to their teams. And so I'm glad we're talking about this today, because a leader's employee experience is just as important as any other ones, and possibly even more important, because their experience they're having will drive their behaviors, and then their behaviors scale through the rest of their team. Because if they're stressed, they pass stress down onto their team. If they're impatient.
Sorry, go ahead. No. I was going to say, not to mention how lonely this job can be.
Absolutely. And that is a great point too, where, you talk about support. That's where leaders need each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's lonely at the top, and the CEO needs support elsewhere. And that's another topic that I'll get into in a moment. But in terms of the leadership team, directors, they all have people who are their peer group, who are at the same level, facing similar kinds of issues, that they need to help one another with the problems they're facing. The problem is that many organizations aren't created in a way that creates alignment between the various departments, between the various teams. So they're not necessarily looking at each other as peers, but as other people who happen to be in a similar position in the company. But that, if this conversation is about support, that is a huge area of support, is finding your peers, whomever they are, who are in a similar situation.
Also, a lot of times, right now, I'm going to use that caregiver analogy. Like, our parents are our caregiver, and sometimes we forget to ask them how they're doing, because as children we're so used to of them taking care of us, that sometimes we forget that we also need to, like, hey, how are you doing? Check in with them. And I think the same thing can be said about managers, is that we tend to forget that they're also human beings, that someone needs to check on them too. And that doesn't necessarily have to be another manager. It can be somebody on the team. It can be their teammate or their employee to check on their manager and say, hey, how are you doing? How are you holding up? Especially like pandemic, it's crazy. I was thinking about it today too. Like, I'm to a point again where I'm like, I just I just need a break, something to do, or just had something fun to do. But a lot of times we forget that managers are people. And that's why I love the fact that we're talking about this, because even me and you, we haven't even thought of talking about this until when we're talking to Jenny. It's like, yeah, like, how come we're not talking about leaders? How come we're not talking about their self-care? How come we're not talking about how much pressure they have? I know, like, in my circle, I know so many people that are directors, managers, senior managers, and the amount of pressure on them right now, and all these lockdowns, shutdowns, and I call it house arrest for if you live in Ontario, can't go anywhere. But how much pressure is that on managers? And why aren't we talking about the pressure that these guys are facing in the long hours that they are working? How is that even not a discussion?
Well, it should be, because it impacts the entire organization. The problem is that it's not a discussion, because a lot of times we focus on the employee population and we forget that managers, directors, VPs are all parts of the employee population. They may be on leadership teams, etc., but they're also in the employ of the organization. They're also having experience that's going to drive what is going to be the other people's experience. For example, I was talking with a colleague earlier who was talking about a company that basically was being forced into not being remote. All of the employees, white collar workers, could fully be doing it remote. And they could, but they don't. They're forced into it. And whomever is making that decision is being, I'm sure, evaluated not on, employee satisfaction, retention, anything like that, but just on specific numbers that they believe they can only achieve with people in the office. And so leaders need to be pointed in the right direction. If boards and CEOs are only evaluating their teams on the results they get, well, their leadership is going to be, it's going to be up to them however they want to get those results. At whomever's expense, at whatever cost-cutting endeavor, whatever it may be, to get these results that may not be sustainable, but they'll achieve those results. And so that's why it's important that we understand that the leadership experience, how they are motivated, will ultimately then trickle down to the rest of the organization. If they're told your job is to care about your team, they'll be more likely to actually take the effort to care about their team and ask questions how you're doing. I really like your point. I want to go back to your point, though, about the employees asking their manager about it, because I think this can be something that's really valuable in multiple ways. One, it's a human-to-human connection, right? We all need that pretty much right now. So just to have that, and to have the manager who doesn't necessarily feel seen so often, will probably feel good, because even though they're your manager, they're a human being. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it feels good to be seen. It feels good to have somebody recognize, you know what? You're under some pressure. I get that. I understand that. And I want to check in and see how you're doing. So that's one aspect of it that, just on a human to human basis, I think that can be very valuable. But then also on a relationship basis, because not all managers are necessarily comfortable initiating that kind of conversation. Not all managers are necessarily comfortable asking, how are you doing? Genuinely being open and listening to the answer and acting on it. Whereas sometimes it can be an employee can model it to the manager saying, hey, look, this is how we can have the conversation. And you know what? It felt good to have somebody check in on you. So maybe you can do the same with your team.
Also, like the reason I said that was, you as an employee can check on your managers, because I did that with my bosses, especially with one or two. I had a really one. I had, till this day, I still remember him. My boss. I love my first boss. I give him full credit for my HR career. We had an amazing relationship, but it takes two to tango. And I think a lot of times we don't talk about, or we don't put enough emphasis on that managers are people too. And just like when we say employees, that actually includes the managers too. And it's not always, I think the onus of a happy employee, yes, it stems from the manager, but I think it also goes back to the employee. And my relationship with my first boss, and this is like 15, 16 years later, and I still remember the experience of my relationship relationship with technical difficulty. Okay, we're back. I think we're back.
Yep.
Sorry, guys, I had some technical difficulties here. Remember, it's 15. I don't know what's happening. Sorry, guys. I guess it's the epidemic or the whole load on the network. Going back to what I was saying, maybe the universe doesn't want me to talk about this.
All the kids are home and doing virtual school. So
Yeah,
it puts the load right on the
a lot of
networks
load.
in this area.
I think my mom has YouTube on. I can hear it. Not to mention, don't have YouTube on 1:30. The experience was great with me and my boss, but my point is, it takes two to tango. So I made an effort, he made an effort. Both of us eventually became comfortable with one another. Like, he used to call me cheeky, and I never took offense. I still don't take offense. But that was the relationship. And I think sometimes we get too caught up on defining relationships that maybe, especially now, I think a lot of people have this fear of speaking to one another in a freely comfortable way, then in case it's not seen appropriate. But asking your manager, showing your manager that you care about them, can help them appreciate you caring about them, and then in return to tank. Oh, we're back. Just on a human level, if we just remove the titles for a second, I think especially during this pandemic, I think it's really important to, in order I think we have to, are we back? Okay, I don't know what's happening. My mom's on YouTube, I think. I just want to, actually, I want to direct a question to you since you're an expert. This is your expertise, employee experience. Now, what advice would you give companies or anybody listening on how a company can build, I'm going to call it manager experience?
Well, to start by doing it intentionally, start by thinking about it, because that's part of the problem is we just let it be. We just, we implement programs, we implement processes, but we don't understand holistically what the manager experience is. If we did, then a lot more than 42% of managers would have had managerial training, because 58% of people who are in management positions haven't had any kind of training to do that. So it's about understanding, what does that experience look like, whether it be a new manager. You're coming up, it means you are likely good at whatever it was your previous role was, but you need new skills. What does that transition look like? Mm-hmm. What does it look like? What is the person's relationship with their boss? What is the expectations with their teams? What is their relationship with their peers? Because like we were talking about before, peers can be a huge support system for managers. However, if the system isn't created that way, if their experience is designed that their peers are actually looked as rivals instead of peers, then you're not going to feel that same support system. So just like companies should be looking at the employee journey, they should be looking at the candidate journey, they should also be looking at the manager's journey of what it is. What does performance management look like from their perspective? Because we often think about, and rightfully so, what does performance management look like to the employee? What's their experience like doing it? But on the other hand, what is the experience like for a manager? If we're asking people to fill out 3 hours worth of forms for every employee, or we're asking them to have an unreasonable number of check-ins or whatever it might be, it's not going to realistically happen. So we have to understand, what's the experience that we're creating for managers, and ultimately, what are we trying to create out of that experience? Because it's not just, well, let's improve the experience, but the experience needs to be aligned to creating a good experience for employees. And that's where I would start when it comes to managers. But I fear we lost you again. I think we did. I think we lost you again. You back?
I want to Hi. I don't know what happened. Okay, we're still live. Sorry, guys. I think I'm having the internet problem, and I'm gonna. It's Rogers. I blame Rogers. Anyways, going back to, you brought some great, interesting points. I wanna highlight something that I think a lot of people don't understand how, and the reason I brought up like how lonely the manager role can be. It's not all that may seem to other people, like, oh, you're a manager, it might be like all fun and dandy. It's never fun and dandy, and it can at times be very lonely. I remember my experience as a manager when I first became a manager at a company, and it was for a location at a call center, and I only have two other peers that were two other managers, and there was just the three of us. And I think we had 300 employees, and then team leaders. But then team leaders and managers, there is a little bit of a difference. But I can remember how lonely, like that was my first manager role, and transitioning from an employee to a manager, how lonely it was. You didn't have someone to talk to. You could like, okay, another manager, but then on top of that, I'm HR. So there's a lot of things I couldn't discuss with openly with other managers. I can only talk to an HR about it. But it was like, when I think about it, it was actually very lonely experience. My first manager role.
Yes, and then imagine how lonely the CEO position is.
Yeah.
Imagine how lonely it is because they have no peers within the company, right? They have nobody who they can fully, rely on in that exact same way because of their responsibilities, because of people's accountabilities to them, because of their direct reports, all of that. It becomes a very, very lonely position, which is why they also require support. They also require people who are able to give them honest feedback. And the problem is that once you're a manager, it's really hard to get completely honest feedback. As much as people tell you it is, and there are scenarios where it does exist.
Yeah.
But just by the nature of the position, the nature of the power of having the power over somebody else's role changes what they can and can't say to you. It changes what true candor really looks like, because sometimes if you are truly honest with people, you'll be putting your job at risk, genuinely, even with a great boss relationship. And that's going to happen. And so that if you have a boss,
if you have a great relationship with your boss,
if you have a boss with a great relationship, it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, because I'm like,
but it is possible, though, depending on the individual, even because you could have a great relationship with a mediocre boss.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing about it. Not every boss and in every situation is going to take things, well, I could love you, adore you, but if you tell me something that hits at something I don't want to hear, or makes me feel like, you know what, she's not in line with the direction I'm taking this company, it may or may not put your role at risk, but it can also impact, how often do you get leaned on for projects? How often do you get included in opportunities, right? Because a lot of times, not all of the time, but a lot of times bosses see people who are disagreeing with them or complaining as not aligned, when sometimes they're just trying to improve things. They're just trying to make things better. And that comes to what we talked about, you were saying about the relationship. The relationship will improve that, right? You've got a good relationship with your boss. They'll know when you're complaining, it's not because you're a complainer, it's because you know things could be better. But
yeah, it does come back to, I'm sorry, as you're talking, I'm mentally like picturing all my previous bosses. And I do agree that it does depend on your relationship. I had one boss that no fault to me, didn't really have a good relationship. I was new. When I got hired, the person who hired me resigned and was going to a different position. So a new VP of HR was coming. The new VP of HR didn't really take the time to build a relationship with me anyways. I don't know if she took time to build a relationship with other people, to the point where I did something that she actually told me to do, but then she didn't give me full instructions, and then she didn't like, I did exactly what she told me to do, but then she left out a very important information, that just do a focus group. So long story short, she told me to send out, do a survey with the employees and have it sent to her about me, have the employees give feedback about me and have it sent to her. So I had sent it to all, 300 employees, and she was getting it, and she got pissed off. It was one of the reasons I do believe that led for my termination with her, which I already knew was going to happen. You can feel the vibe with your boss to know if they like you or not.
She was just looking for something. You and I both know it. At that point, if you felt that vibe, you're a smart woman. You knew what was going on. She just wanted to find anything to justify
Oh yeah,
it,
I was
right?
terminated. The way I was terminated was very horrible. I came back from vacation and computer wasn't working, and I see my boss standing at my door. I was like, okay, I'm getting terminated. I was like, all right. So
How humane.
yeah, and in HR too, it was my first time getting terminated because I've always excelled. I excelled at that role too. In 6 months I achieved and accomplished so much in 6 months that nobody in that company has ever did in that HR role. But the company had history of turnover in that position at where I was. So that was the other clue I had, that like no HR manager ever lasted more than 6 months in that location. That was the history. And no one cared to find out why. But it was just, let's just keep changing HR. Somehow HR magically supposed to change things. But I agree with you, going back to what we're saying, because we only have a few minutes. I agree. I think it does depend on your relationship that you have with the boss, but then it also comes down to how willing and open. I can say this now that I do coaching. I think it also comes down to you as an individual. How open and receiving are you to feedback? Because if you're not honestly open to receiving feedback, then no matter amount of feedback is going to help you in any way, right? Like you can say I want feedback, but if you are not really open to feedback, then why ask for feedback? Because then you need to, if you put it out there that you want feedback, then just be open to the good and the bad.
Well, you make a good point, and it's something that we might even want to bring up as a topic at some point in one of our conversations, for one of these conversations. And you alluded to earlier, which is around what's the organization's responsibility and what's the individual's responsibility? Because we each there's a contract beyond just the physical contract. There's a psychological contract around the responsibilities we have to one another. So I often talk about it's the organization's responsibility to build psychological safety. But if that psychological safety is there, then it's the individual's responsibility to say something. Right? It's not just a one-way street. And I talk a lot, and my world is around making sure that companies are living up to their responsibility to individuals. But as you were talking about, with a person just talking to their boss, asking them how they're doing, that's where there's this shared responsibility, and that's where organization only really works. It's not just about organizations creating this context in this environment that everything's perfect and all the people just letting things get handed to them. No, it's about recognizing that, you know what, you're dedicated to me, I'm dedicated to you, and I'm going to bring my feedback, my productivity, my effort to the work that we're doing. It's not just about individuals letting it come to them. But I think that responsibility topic would be a good one. We're just about to come up on time. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone. These things happen, unfortunately, especially, with all of us working from home. But I'm really glad we had this conversation. I think this is something that's really important, that people start to understand that leaders are people too.
Yeah.
Managers are people too. They're having an experience too. Sometimes when they make bad decisions, harsh decisions, sometimes it's what the system forces them into. It's not always in their control. And some empathy, compassion, understanding in all directions, things will be better for everyone.
You summed it up pretty good. Like making decisions is hard, especially, like I'm just going to touch on pandemic layoffs and stuff. Those decisions not easy. I don't want anyone out there to think that, anybody has getting joy out of deciding who to terminate. Like being in HR, I can tell you, I've been in this 15 years. Anytime we had to do layoffs, and even me as not the manager, it never felt good laying off anybody. Managers have to, a good leader knows that they have to sometimes they're going to have to make choices and decisions not going to favor everybody, and they're not going to be liked by everybody, but that's what makes them a leader. So let's not forget that leaders also have responsibilities to run a business, and sometimes that means making really hard decisions. And my ending point on this topic is just basically in line with Gil. In short and sweet, managers and leaders are also human beings, so have empathy towards your boss, your manager, your leader. If you see them working hard, ask them, how they're doing, and is any way you can support them. Because managers do have a tough job right now. Leaders have a lot of tough job right now during this pandemic, making a lot of hard decisions, working around the clock. With the shutdown, lockdowns, rules are changing. We're going to have another rule coming out on February 22nd on what that looks like. Maybe we're going back to work. It's just a lot of change happening. So anybody out there listening as an employee, checking in on your manager, support them, ask them how you can support them as well during this pandemic. Build those two-way relationships. And I would say throw out any handbook or manual you think on how to build a relationship. Just go with your heart. It's a human relationship. So on that note, we will end our segment. So sorry about the technical difficulty that we were experiencing today. Again, it's pandemic. Sorry, guys. We will be back next Wednesday with another great topic and just some exciting news. We have some great guest speakers lined up for March. I'm so excited and can't wait for March to come around. We have great speakers coming on. So stay tuned. Everybody enjoy your week, and don't forget to check on your manager. Bye.